welcome to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, all by myself. And not only has the spooky crew abandoned me, but so has my voice as well. I don't think I've sounded this bad since the very first year of the show. As we just celebrated our 13th anniversary last week, it's only appropriate that I have the worst cold that I've had since that time. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through the entire show tonight. I have been fighting this all week long. I still had to work a couple of new shifts this week. And I fought my way through those. And I seem to be on the mend. I thought I was getting better. And then today I didn't talk at all. I just stayed home and I watched some of the new program that we'll be discussing tonight on the show. And then I caught up with True Detective. I said, I'm just going to sit here and lay on the couch and rest up and get ready for the show. And sure enough, around 6 o'clock, I decided to finally open my mouth and speak. And I had no voice. Now, by this point, I knew that, Stephanie Burke is away this weekend. Matt Moniz had texted me telling me he was not going to make it in. And Matt Costa said he was under the weather and that he would direct the show from home. So by now, I've completely abandoned any shot I had at being able to cancel the show. I should have spoken earlier, but I didn't. So I guess we'll just fight through it together. And if it becomes annoying to the point where you can't listen to my voice anymore, well, my voice probably annoys you the rest of the time anyway, so hopefully you can fight your way through it. But if you're watching on Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com, you'll see when I'm on the screen, and then when we have our guests on the screen, you'll see them on the screen. So you only have to really listen to the parts where you see them. But this is definitely way worse than I expected my voice was going to be coming into the show. If I had known it was going to be this bad, I probably would have definitely canceled. But we have two very important guests tonight who are here to tell us about a new project that is coming out and a new campaign they have that's kicking off this week. So we couldn't not do the show. We couldn't not have our guests on to talk about this big new campaign and how you can get involved with helping out the next great paranormal documentary project. Now, next week, we will also be talking about the X-Filers conference, which I don't know if you recall, but a few weeks ago, when we had Greg and Dana Newkirk on to talk about the new Hellier series, we mentioned briefly that they were going to be at this X-Filers conference. Well, this week, I was officially added to the lineup. Matt Moniz was already part of the lineup, but I was added this week. And I will be the MC for the entire weekend. So that'll be happening at the end of April in Rhode Island. You can go to xfilersunite.com to find out more. But you definitely want to get on board for this because you get to hang pretty much with the whole spooky crew. I'm pretty sure that Stephanie Burke's going to be involved as well. She's in discussions right now with them, so I don't want to jump the gun. But you'll be able to hang out with the whole spooky crew that weekend, as well as Greg and Dana and numerous fantastic guests, including some of the folks you've heard on the show in the past. Do you remember Mike Clone, the owl guy? The guy who was talking to us about the connections between UFOs and owls? He will be part of the conference. Tom Reed, who you've heard talking about his family's UFO experience and the monument they were trying to get erected, the memorial they were trying to get erected here in Massachusetts, he will be there. And numerous other names that you'll recognize from the show over the years. So we'll talk more about that next week. We're going to have Jamie and Val from the X-Filers Unite conference on with us. And they will give us some more details next week. But in talking with them, I don't want to really give away too much information, but there's prices that are listed on the website to buy those tickets. I don't. All right, I'll say it just because, we love our audience. We want to make sure they get a good deal. Those prices may change. So if you want to get in on a great deal, you can go buy your tickets now. Because the prices are really, really low for the great weekend that you'll get. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up getting bumped up a little bit. So you want to go and get your tickets now while you can. So, like I said, we'll talk more about that next week. We'll also have next week Dr. Irina Scott, who I don't know very many people that have had above top secret clearance, but she's one of the few that I do know that has. And she'll join us next week to talk about not only UFOs in general, but to talk about her personal UFO experiences, including her first one, which happened in the Bridgewater Triangle. So stay tuned for that next Saturday night. But tonight we're going to talk monsters. Tonight we're going to be joined by probably our favorite guy to talk about monsters with. An old friend of the show, Seth Breedlove, who you know from the Small Town Monsters film series. And we'll also be joined by Adam Duggan as well. They're going to talk with us about the new projects that they have coming out and how you can help get involved with them on those. So let's bring them on now. Good evening, Seth and Adam. How are you? That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping you guys can just carry the show, because I know that you will, with great information. So I'm just going to jump in now and then when I feel like I need to move things along. But basically, just from watching, I only got through the first 4 episodes of On the Trail of Bigfoot. But oh my gosh, this is, for all the work that you've done, Seth, you found a way to kind of personalize this and show the audience what it really means for you to be researching these topics.
And the series is called On the Trail of Bigfoot. It's a 6-episode miniseries that's close to 3 hours long, probably like 10 minutes under 3 hours long. And it was shot over the course of 2018. And I kind of went into it with the intention of making it a solo sort of filmmaking experiment. In 2017, we released, well, I guess in 2018 we released, but in 2017, our first On the Trail of miniseries went into production, and that series was called On the Trail of Champ. So in 2018, I set out to kind of do what Alexander Pedikov had done with On the Trail of Champ. And with On the Trail of Champ, he had originally, Alexander had gone out with the intention of making that series with a full crew. He was supposed to have like 4 or 5 guys with him, and sort of at the last minute, all of the people he was supposed to go film with backed out due to one reason or another, and he ended up making the entire miniseries by himself. So I just thought that was a really cool sort of way of approaching, such a huge project, and I thought it would be interesting to attempt something similar myself. And like the way Small Town Monsters operates now is we have a full crew. It's anywhere from 4 to 7 to 8 guys go out when we make a movie, and there's a fully functioning crew, and it's great. But very early on, when this all started, it was very, very common for there to only be like 1 or 2 of us together when we were filming. And I definitely prefer the full crew, but I kind of miss those early like guerrilla filmmaking days, and so this was like kind of an opportunity to go back to that early, the total indie run and gun style that we started with. So that was the whole intention of doing On the Trail of, was not just to tell the history of the subject of Bigfoot, but also to kind of get to dive into it head first by myself and tell the story on my own. So that's kind of what I set out to do. And like along the way, I got to take Adam and my friend Shannon Legros and some other friends that have been associated with STM over the years, but hadn't made it into any of our projects. And then at the end of the day, it's probably the most personal thing I've done. I mean, like you said, it's my sort of personal look at the Bigfoot phenomenon, and it's my there actually was, I mean, it was totally unintentional, but there actually was sort of a change in my personal opinion of the subject that, from sort of the beginning of the year when I started filming to the end of the year when I wrapped production on this, and Adam was along for some of that. So, but yeah, it was an intense project, and it was made over the entire course of 2018 and filmed in like 15 different states, 21 different interviews, multiple hours in the woods, just coast to coast. It was a real adventure. Like it was almost like a filmmaking adventure course or something. It was crazy.
Did you find it hard for you to be able to put yourself into the story, having been a documentarian for so long, and having to remove any of your own beliefs and biases, and just kind of letting the subjects tell their own story? Was it hard for you to be able to personalize this and to put yourself into it?
I hated it. I kept myself out of all STM movies, and I really have no intention of going forward and intruding into the stories we tell. But with this one, the approach was for it to be a personal project, and I was supposed to narrate it in the first person and all that, but I had no intention of filming myself and including myself on camera, mostly because I'm the one that had to edit it, and I hated the idea of staring at my face every day while I was editing it. So I'd managed to sort of keep myself removed from the series all the way through editing. I mean, there's actually a very early cut of episode 1 where I wasn't even in the episode. So I'd managed to keep myself out of it until sort of I got to the point where I watched those early cuts of the early episodes, and I realized that by including myself, it not only personalized it a little more, but it also gave a very, I guess, almost like a convenient way of telling this massive story where we could jump around a little bit more and sort of smooth out those transitions in a way that we probably wouldn't have been able to if I was simply narrating it. Because the jump from like episode 2, which is focused on the West Coast and all about the history, that early history of the Bigfoot subject, to episode 3, which opens in Minerva, Ohio. That was kind of a weird jump to make. So, to have episode 3 open with me talking to Barbara Galloway, who was involved in the Minerva monster case, and that opens it up, to the whole East Coast Bigfoot subject. That kind of thing just made sense, and I felt like at the end of the day, like I was happy having been able to tell a personal story. I just don't know that I have too much of a desire to do that sort of thing again. But it did seem to work okay for this series.
And Adam, was it hard for you to watch Seth for what you were around for, to see him put himself through that, to have to put himself on camera, or were you kind of reveling in the fact that now he gets to have the camera turned on him for a change?
Yeah, no, I think that I think it's really interesting, because I think it's a natural, however uncomfortable step for Seth to take. I mean, he spent the last several years STM, allowing other people to tell their stories, and inevitably during that time, you're going to accumulate stories and ideas and kind of thoughts of your own and opinions and things like that. And I think, like I said, it may be uncomfortable for him to do it, but I do think it's good because he's just having been friends with Seth now for a while and now being involved in STM a little bit more. He's a curious person anyway, and he enjoys this.
He's a really weird person.
He's very strange. But he enjoys these stories, and I think it was a really cool thing to see Seth begin to explore kind of his own story and his own journey throughout this, and kind of look for answers on his own, because he spent so much time allowing other people to kind of tell their stories. So that was really interesting, and I did get some kind of sick pleasure out of seeing Seth try to put himself on camera and play a bit of a different role in the storytelling. So,
well, that's what I think is it's a very hard thing for anybody really to have to look at. I'm certainly not going to listen to myself back on this episode. I'll just fast forward through my talking and just listen to you guys when I review it. But it's hard for anybody, like in radio, to go back and listen to themselves. And I'm sure it's hard for anybody in a visual media to go back and watch themselves. So it's just an uncomfortable thing to kind of have to not only know that you're going to go through that, but also to be the main story driver. Like that's kind of the real challenge there, is to be able to take yourself farther enough back, Seth, from what you've already learned about Bigfoot in your other projects and in your own research, and to say, we need to start at the beginning, and I need to be the avatar for the audience in that journey from the very start. So
yeah, and just to jump off that, like the balance for me was like I was okay with having myself be sort of the I guess device that's driving the story forward. I wasn't okay with, and I never will be okay with, using myself as like the focal point of it. So I don't think the focus of this was never supposed to be Seth Breedlove. The focus was the subject, and then I'm pretty much just there as another character and as the storytelling device that we could use to jump between 21 different interviews, 14 different locations, and all these unique story threads. And one thing that I do think is funny is, like, I'm in every single episode on camera in some capacity except for episode 5, and episode 5 is called Area X. And in that episode, Adam and I actually went to the Ouachita Mountains in Oklahoma together, and while we were there, we had some strange experiences that kind of like moved my level of skepticism from where I was at when we started to a place of being, somewhat accepting of the fact that maybe these creatures are actually out there. And that episode, which is intensely personal, like a very, very personal episode, is the one episode in the entire sort of 6-episode miniseries that I'm never actually on camera in. And, the main reason was that when I set out to make the miniseries, it was not with the intention of putting myself on camera. So all the way back in June when I had shot this, I just had no intention of being on camera. So there isn't 1 minute of footage anywhere of me actually in Area X. So the whole episode is focused on the group that we were in Area X with, but it's told through a way that, it's pretty clear. I mean, from the first person, narration that event that we experienced in X was one of the sort of defining moments of my year.
Well, as much as you say that you didn't want to be on camera all that much, you do put some of the great people who are out doing the research and doing the investigative work into Bigfoot on camera throughout the course of the series. And as you mentioned, Shannon LeGros is on there, and you'll see other folks who have been on the show in the past: Lauren Coleman, Don Keating, Stan Gordon. I mean, this is really like a who's who of people that have been researching this over the past, 40 plus years.
Yeah. there was like a very conscious sort of effort to make to get people in the series that might not just be sort of a big name personality in the field or anything, but also people who I consider sort of not experts, but very well versed in their particular area of research or investigation. So, I had opportunities to interview quote unquote Bigfoot celebs over the past year, and I just never really jumped at that particular opportunity. I went with the people that I thought, would speak very well about the subject that I knew I was going to be exploring within the series. So like Lauren Coleman's a natural because he's so well versed in the history of cryptozoology. So, you've got Lauren Coleman to sort of walk you through Tom Slick and the evolution of the Bigfoot subject and the early Wildman newspaper reports and all that stuff. And, I got to interview Mark Marcel while I was out on the West Coast about the Ape Canyon incident. And Stan Gordon is there to walk us through the paranormal and the UFO / high strangeness Bigfoot stuff that happened during the 70s. And so every single person that we interviewed or that I interviewed was there, for a very specific reason. And they were there because I like and respect them as much as people as like, a Bigfoot researcher. I mean, these are all people that I know or knew before I started filming this in some capacity other than Mark Marcel, who I'd only, spoken briefly with through like Facebook Messenger. So, and I think you come away from it too. I mean, Adam can maybe speak to this, but I think you come away with it from it, the entire series with sort of a knowledge of all the different types of researchers and personalities that inhabit the field. Like there's I mean, obviously there's only 21 people, so you can't be, you can't exactly say that it's perfect in explaining how everyone is, but it's definitely a very disparate sort of group of people. And I think it does do a good job of acting as an example of how unique and different all the different aspects of the field and the researchers are from each other. And then you have Shannon and Adam in there, adding a little bit of personality as well. So hopefully too, like a big thing for me, I'm from Ohio, and Don Keating is someone that I was very aware from a young age, and I think anymore, he's kind of dropped out of the research aspect of Bigfoot now, and I'm a little concerned that people will either be completely unaware of him or forget about his research. So I thought it was cool to actually have Don in there, again, and kind of put him in front of a camera. So for some people, that's going to be their first time getting to know Don. And I really want this to act as an introduction for some people to folks like Don Keating or Mark Marcel, who, don't necessarily make it into all the TV shows that some of the other researchers out there do.
Right. And I think that the TV shows that are out there now are kind of what this younger generation is basing a lot of their knowledge of Bigfoot on is these shows that they're seeing on television now or over the last 5 years or so. I mean, Adam, you're a younger guy, but to see somebody who we consider to be a legend like Lauren Coleman be part of this, but then he also gets to say something like, well, Ivan Sanderson told me. And then you have a direct link even back to another generation. I mean, this is the way to kind of, when you're telling the history of these Bigfoot sightings, this is the way to kind of bring it all together to say, not only are we giving you the people who influenced us, but they can even reach back to the people that influenced them, and you can realize this has been a long, ongoing process of trying to determine exactly what these creatures are.
Yeah, I think it's really the miniseries covers, the better part of the last century. And even into the 19th century as well, obviously with the wild man reports and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, from the very beginning, it was intended to be an introduction to Bigfoot in every way possible. So if someone has a mild interest in this subject but knew nothing about it, they can sit down and watch On the Trail of Bigfoot, and they might have a knowledge now of why, not just like a knowledge of the history of it and the cool stories or whatever, but also have an understanding of why people like Lauren Coleman or even myself are interested in it to begin with. Because I really think that for the most part, like if you just are a casual observer from the outside of like the paranormal, or a casual observer, or not even a casual observer, if you're just aware of Bigfoot as a pop cultural icon, or this figure that makes it onto the local news sometimes, you might not understand why there are people that actively look for Bigfoot, and it kind of becomes this joke to everyone. But I genuinely hope that people watch On the Trail of Bigfoot and come away from it, with an understanding of why there is such an interest in it, and why people do spend so much time and put so much effort into researching and investigating, the subject to begin with. And a lot of that has to do with people like Lauren Coleman and Stan Gordon and their impact on a new generation, that have actually gone into looking into this. I mean, you can't really say enough about Lauren Coleman's impact on cryptozoology as a whole, because of the number of books, he's written and things that he's done and said that have introduced people to these concepts and maybe inducted them into the paranormal to begin with.
Well, Seth, you know this to be true, and I know this to be true. It's the beards. Having beards always makes you seem more authoritarian about what you're talking about.
That's true. You have to have one. I'm actually forcing Adam to grow one right now.
You gotta, the more bushier and fuller your beard can be, the more sage you look. So I like it. It's a good trick. So, Adam, why don't you, this is the first time that we've had you on the show. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background and how you got involved in this, and also how you hooked up with Seth?
Yeah, so more or less, my dad kind of fed my interest in kind of all things. I guess I probably started out more interested in the whole paranormal side of things, and the ghosts and all that good stuff. And that definitely came from my dad. He grew up reading about and wondering about and trying to explore whatever he could in regards to, everything from UFOs to ghosts to cryptids. And he even still remembers, he told me a few days ago, we were talking about all of this, and he still remembers the first book that he read on the subject, and reading the Osman story, and just thinking that was the most amazing thing ever. And so he just instilled that in me, I think, from a young age. And so I carried that on as I got older, and did a lot of research and self-study and things like that, and just was very much an armchair kind of thinker. I'd hesitate to even use the word researcher necessarily. And began to take it a bit more seriously, and started writing on a website called Search the Woods. That was my site, and it was just my thoughts and more or less frustrations regarding the kind of Bigfoot subject, and how maybe it wasn't taken as seriously as it could potentially be taken. And I think, kind of going back to what you guys were talking about a minute ago, for better or worse, my generation and generations certainly after mine, the exposure to Bigfoot has very much been just a pop culture icon. It's been, Animal Planet shows and Discovery Channel shows and things that kind of ebb and flow in popularity, depending on the time of year or a recent sighting or whatever else. But there's so much more to the subject, and I think that's kind of where I was trying to go as well. And then it was a Small Town Monsters and Seth and what he was doing, I thought was really cool, because it was something that I had hoped would be done sometime sometime in the near future. And he kind of took on that. And then I think I reached out randomly to Seth on Facebook one day. Seth is in Ohio. I live in southeastern Tennessee, and we just kind of connected there and started talking about things, and had a lot of stuff in common, and have become real world friends, which I think is crazy that people, I think sometimes people forget that there's more than just what's on your computer screen, and you can make real connections and have real friends and that kind of stuff. And then from there, Seth was kind enough to kind of give me an opportunity to tag along on some adventures over the past couple of years, and then most recently come on at working with his wife Adrienne as a producer on one of the projects I'm sure we'll talk about later this year, Momo, the Missouri Monster. So kind of that's more or less a very high overview of my progression, I guess, in the subject.
Well, you mentioned coming into this from a background in all different types of paranormal research, and not all Bigfoot researchers get to that point. Many of them actually take offense in referring to cryptozoology as a paranormal pursuit because they feel like there is something that's actually very just based in reality, and that we really just don't understand what's going on yet. Did you come into this with any of these theories of kind of the alternate explanations for Bigfoot, that it's more than just a flesh and blood creature, or did you have that kind of thought process going into it?
No, I think that I am very much kind of in the flesh and blood camp, probably to a fault. I'm trying to get better about thinking outside the box, but I haven't really gotten there yet. I think my kind of interest in the paranormal to kick everything off actually probably skewed me a bit more towards the idea of Bigfoot being a flesh and blood creature, an ape, more or less, just undiscovered. I tend to be probably more along the lines of what you just referenced. I tend to push back a little bit against the paranormal side of things when it comes to Bigfoot. Now that I am also very, very open to the idea of there being paranormal things. I certainly believe in demons and spirits and things like that. Just personally coming from a Christian perspective, like I do think that those things exist. I just don't necessarily think that Bigfoot falls in that camp. I think it's pretty fascinating enough to think that there's a 800-pound undiscovered North American primate walking around. I don't necessarily feel the need to ascribe anything paranormal to it, but I certainly won't not listen to someone's argument because that's what they believe. I think everybody deserves to have their own opinions, and then I think if you're willing to share those opinions, you should also be willing to allow others to question them and have reasonable discourse about them. I think that's how we get places in any subject in any field, but specifically something as inherently controversial as Bigfoot.
And Seth, you've never shied away from discussing those aspects of Bigfoot, but on the Trail of Bigfoot, you actually do a kind of a step back and explain to people exactly why those theories have come up. It's not just a matter of because we can't explain it, we must ascribe a paranormal explanation to it just as an easy out, although you do kind of explore that possibility in some cases too. But you go back and you share some of these cases where there are the real connections to high strangeness with Bigfoot sightings.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to do a brief, and here's the thing, like I've showed this to a number, I've showed the miniseries to a number of people, and I've actually already received some pushback from some people about the fact that I included, some of the weirder aspects of the phenomena. But the fact is, like, I'm kind of in the same camp as Adam. Like, personally, I believe it's an undiscovered ape, but like he said, I don't discount what people claim their experience to be, and I don't discount other people's opinions or theories. And for me, if you're going to do an overview of the Bigfoot subject, you can't just leave out the high strangeness cases and some of the weirder aspects of the phenomena because you don't necessarily believe that is the root cause of Bigfoot. You can't just ignore that stuff because it is a part of the history, and there are those weird cases, even though they are few and far between. There are weird cases, and they have a place in the history of the subject. And to ignore that, the Chestnut Ridge area and some of the weirder stories that have come out of there would be a disservice to the subject, regardless of what my own personal opinions are. It's always been for me. And Shannon actually said this during her interview, and I'm not even sure that it made it into the final cut, but Shannon refers to herself as a collector of stories, more so than like an expert or even an enthusiast. And I'd actually kind of consider myself in the same boat as Shannon. Like, I think I'm a collector of stories, and I'm also a bit of a historian of the strange, apparently, and a documentarian of that. And so, I mean, you get this, Tim, because like you're really a reporter and a journalist too. So like that's our job. It's not really to interject ourselves into these things, which is funny because I have interjected myself into the story, but I at the end of the day, I'm still letting the people that are walking us through this history do the real bulk of the storytelling. And Stan Gordon is going to tell us a really fascinating story about Bigfoots and UFOs. I'm not going to shut him off just because personally I don't believe that's the root cause.
I think that's a really good point. Like, I think if you're going to tell the story, if you're going to really dive into the subject, whatever your personal beliefs may be, I think it's kind of intellectually dishonest to just disregard those other stories because, whether you like it or not, high strangeness is a part of Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. It may come more often and be more prominent in some stories than others, but you can't ignore it. I mean, you have to explore those ideas, and I like I said earlier, I think having discussions about them, whatever side you're coming from, is a positive thing, and you just can't disregard them just because they don't line up with your personal beliefs. That would be doing everyone a disservice, and I think that would be kind of just being intellectually negligent, I guess.
Yeah, and those stories are really cool.
Yeah, they're really interesting. I mean, I don't care what you think. Like, they're fascinating to listen to.
Yeah, they're super cool.
Right. Well, and here's the thing too. One of you guys, or Lyle Blackburn, or Cliff Barrickman, one of you guys could come out of the woods one day with an actual flesh and blood creature, and prove to everybody that yes, look, here's Bigfoot. It's an ape. We found it. But that doesn't mean that all these other things that happened around these Bigfoot sightings didn't happen either.
Right.
It doesn't mean that people didn't see UFOs or have other strange experiences. The dimensional portals, that might be a little bit of a harder one to explain, but it doesn't mean that they didn't happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's like, it is one of the fascinating things that episode 4, that's the final episode you watched. Like, I mean, Eric says, like, the longer you're in this, and I don't think this is a blanket statement necessarily that Eric's making for all researchers, but the longer he's been in it, the further away from the flesh and blood camp he's gotten because of the number of weird Bigfoot cases that he takes. And I think a large part of that, though, I mean, you can't ignore the fact that he's also in that Chestnut Ridge area of Pennsylvania. I don't know what it is about that place, but there are so many weird stories that come out of there and so many strange things that are reported. Stan Gordon sends me emails on an almost weekly basis where he's just like telling me the latest bizarre things, the latest bizarre cases he's been taking. And it seems like, like the number of just standard Bigfoot reports that Stan gets is actually smaller anymore than like the high strangeness stuff. It's a really weird place, and I think that probably has an impact on, the researchers that are actually in that area, like Eric.
So how can people see On the Trail of Bigfoot when it comes out in March?
It comes out March 29th. It'll be available on Vimeo On Demand, VidiSpace, Amazon, and on DVD through shop.smalltownmonsters.com. And it's going to play a couple smaller screenings as well, but I'm not doing too many big screenings for this one because it's episodic and it's kind of meant to be seen, as the entire 6-episode miniseries.
Will it be released all at once, or so people can binge watch it, or will it be?
Yeah. It'll all 6 episodes will come out on the 29th. And on Amazon, it's condensed into 2 films. It's still all 6 episodes, but they're cut into story arcs. So the first story arc is The Legend, and that will be movie number 1, and that's episodes 1 through 3. And then movie number 2 is called The Search, and that's episodes 4 through 6. It's the same content. It's just all the episodes are kind of edited together into a film.
And I do like the story arc approach, too, because, like, you do get a lot of that history ahead of time. And I think there's a lot of people, even that listen to this show, that don't know how deep the history is of some of these sightings and how varied they are, too. For as much as we hear the similarities in the descriptions, and we can say it seems like people are seeing these same creatures no matter where they are, there's so many different circumstances around it, so many different kinds of people, and I think a lot of folks are probably going to be most taken back by the fact that most of these sightings are happening during the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really common report, and yeah, for me I couldn't approach the subject without spending at least an episode on those historical reports. So, like, the first episode is all about the wild man and ape reports, the Ape Canyon incident and Albert Ostman, and it's those first 3 episodes are your history of the subject. So that walks you through pretty much everything, or at least all the major incidents from the earliest reports of what we might term as Bigfoot up till present day, and then episodes 4 through 6 are kind of walking you through the research and some of the various theories about what Bigfoot might actually be. But yeah, that first episode is so geared around those early historical reports because that's actually what got me into the subject and what made me consider the validity of something like Bigfoot actually existing. Because if we have these newspaper reports of wild man and apes that sound, very similar to what we term as Bigfoot today, then, maybe that is cause for us to believe that there's something to it.
And I don't want to say that you glossed over it, but you really didn't spend a lot of time on it, at least in what I saw in the episodes that I saw. But the Patterson-Gimlin film didn't really play that much into the storytelling of that history. Was that a conscious decision, or?
Yeah, it was a conscious decision in that I didn't have the money to license the footage.
That's what I figured might be the case.
So like it's mentioned super briefly, but it's one of those things where like we were looking at a licensing fee that would have basically tripled my budget, and I just it was beyond my ability to go into it. If I can do like an On the Trail of Bigfoot 2, I would certainly spend a little bit more time on the Patterson-Gimlin film. I don't discount like the importance of that piece of history, and that's why it does get mentioned. I think it's in there for like 45-50 seconds, but and the other thing is that there has been countless hours of film and television devoted to that particular piece of Bigfoot history. So I couldn't afford it, and hopefully people will go watch another documentary that actually gets into that one after they watch this one if they want to learn about the Patterson-Gimlin film, because it is a very important piece of the Bigfoot puzzle. It
is, but I mean, it's not like the series doesn't suffer from not really going any more in depth into it either, because I think most people even if you only have a rudimentary understanding of Bigfoot, that clip. Anybody that has ever heard Bigfoot, that's what pops into their head.
I think that what On the Trail of does, On the Trail of Bigfoot, I think it provides context. If someone watches this series and this is their introduction to the subject, they're going to have a much better understanding when they do see the Patterson-Gimlin film as to the importance that it plays in the history of this subject. I think a lot of people, like you both mentioned, if they know anything about Bigfoot, they probably have seen kind of that iconic clip of Patty walking across the creek bed and turning slowly back towards the camera, arms swinging, and walking off. I think that the mainstream, in air quotes, the mainstream Bigfoot community at least has got that clip covered. And if On the Trail of Bigfoot does anything, is it expands so much into the other areas that just probably the casual observer hasn't seen or heard of, and it's going to give them, like I said, more context for the Patterson-Gimlin film. I've mentioned it a few times to several people. I think that this particular series, I know I have had friends and acquaintances and people online and whatever come up and say, well, isn't there just one Bigfoot? Or that's ridiculous. Why would you even explore the possibility of that? We all know that that's just a legend. It's just folklore. It's just whatever. I feel like On the Trail of is this thing where you can say, hey, here's where you can go watch, pretty much 3 hours of why I think this is something legitimately worth your time to look at. Almost like just handing somebody a card and saying, hey, read this, and you're going to at least understand why this should give you pause, and then you can take the Patterson-Gimlin film and then you can apply what you've learned in this particular series and look at that film and figure out where it fits in. So like you said, I don't think it loses anything by not having it. I think it actually probably makes it easier to understand what you're looking at when you do see the Patterson-Gimlin film.
And Adam, you mentioned it there briefly, but I couldn't believe it when I heard it in the course of one of the episodes, but there really are people that think that there's just one Bigfoot. Even now, all these years later, they think it's one single creature that's popping up in all these different places.
Right. It's amazing. We're so within the Bigfoot community. I think a lot of times we don't kind of poke our head out into the rest of the world and see. We assume, hey, everybody knows that they're like this is widespread. Everybody knows that the Patterson-Gimlin film is just one tiny, moment in Bigfoot history, and there's so much more to the subject. But I mean, outside of our little bubble, our little niche within a niche within a small subset of a small subset, that there are outside of that, there are people that just are completely and totally kind of just naive to the subject as a whole. But it is interesting sitting on the inside looking out and being like, how do you not know that?
Yeah, because we've been reading the books and we've been watching the documentaries and all that stuff for years. But for a casual, observer, someone on the outskirts, this is a subject that is like studying a leprechaun or something. I mean, that's really to a lot of people, that's all it is. And so, like with that, armed with that knowledge, I mean, that's why that is the person that we made the mini series for. Maybe not the whole mini series, but especially those first 2 episodes, to say like, look, this isn't something with no historical value. This has been going on much longer than the 1950s when Jerry Crew found the tracks, and also it's much wider spread than you might realize. And one of the reasons it's so fascinating is because it isn't just that people are seeing a similar creature around the country and even around the world. It's that they're seeing a similar creature that behaves in a similar fashion repeatedly in multiple reports. Like that's what that first episode, I keep harping on, like the behavioral characteristics that I find so interesting, how people will echo, the same type of behavioral characteristics that they note in their Bigfoot sighting. And those behavioral characteristics don't just stop, at a certain point in history. They've been carrying on since the 1860s. And probably before that too. But I think that's why it's such a fascinating thing to look into and such a fascinating subject. And I believe like the bulk of people would find this particular topic fascinating if they knew these things. Obviously I can't state that definitively, but I think the bulk of people, like the majority of people, if they know about all of this, they're going to feel the same way about about the subject that most of us do. Like they're gonna see those really interesting facts and subtopics of it, and they're gonna want to dive into it like we did. Right. And we made it too. The other thing I mean to point out is we didn't make this from like a point of we're going to convince you Bigfoot's real. Like that's never really brought up in the miniseries. We're not trying to convince you of anything. We're not trying to show you footage or sounds and say, look, this is proof. There's never a point where that happens. This is simply laying out for you everything that's out there that we had, the time to put on screen, and saying this is the history of the subject up through present day. Doesn't it make you want to figure it out for yourself?
And I think that it definitely does. One of the fascinating aspects is that, Seth, you thought the same thing I did when you were younger and when I was younger, that Bigfoot only happened in the Pacific Northwest. And then much like you found out that it happened in your backyard, I found out that it happened in my backyard. And ever since then, I've been afraid to go in the woods alone. So...
and your backyard is like Bridgewater Triangle and some of those really weird New England areas where the Bigfoot reports can get super creepy. So yeah, that's when I actually heard for the first time that there were reports on the outskirts of Bolivar, Ohio, that blew my mind because for one thing, I spent massive amounts of time out in the woods because I grew up in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing else to do except drive back roads as a teenager, or when you're real little, hike around on foot or ride your bike everywhere. I mean, I had actually ridden my bike up and down some of the roads where I later found out that those sightings were taking place in the 70s and up through the early 2000s. So that was a very surprising thing to learn for me, and then to actually discover that there were Bigfoot reports in Ohio going back to 1869, with the Gallipolis ape report. Like that was shocking to me when I was first getting into this.
Well, we'll talk more about that coming up in the next hour. We'll also talk about the Kickstarter campaign that you can get involved in, and we'll talk about the new projects, including Momo and Terror in the Sky. So stay tuned for more Spooky South Coast as we continue the discussion with our guests, Adam Duggan and Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters, coming right up.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Hour number 2 of Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here. Flying solo. There is no science advisor Matt Moniz, no silent assassin Matt Costa, no psychic medium Stephanie Burke. They are all out tonight. But Matt Costa is here in spirit because he's directing Spooky TV from home. He's under the weather. I'm under the weather. But that's okay. I actually feel the best that I felt all week. Like the cold is subsiding. The sore throat is just about over. The cough is not nearly as bad as it was. There's no more runny nose. Not that you wanted to know that part. But this is just what's been left of my voice. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, it's been a while since I've had no voice. I used to go through this every year, where every winter I would get sick and I would lose my voice for like a week. And it happened the first year of Spooky South Coast, and then we were lucky enough that for the next 12 years it didn't happen. But now, lucky number 13, it comes back with a vengeance. But I still don't think it's as bad as that Heidi Hollis episode in the first year of the show where I couldn't even spit out words. It was like, "Hi, welcome to Spooky South Coast." And I don't know why anybody listened to it, but it was quite a popular episode. Probably because Heidi was such a great guest. And we have great guests tonight as well. We have joining us on the phone from Small Town Monsters, we have Seth Breedlove and we have Adam Duggan. They're talking with us about, in the first hour we were talking about the new series that's coming out on the trail of Bigfoot. And now we're going to be switching gears and talking about some other new projects that are in the works, and also how you can be part of those new projects and how you can get involved and help fund these projects. And Seth, that's something that I know that a lot of people who are fans of Small Town Monsters love getting to be involved in the filmmaking process and helping to fund the creation of some of these documentaries.
Yeah, I mean, the Kickstarters have been a part of this since actually 2015 when we released the Minerva Monster documentary. We ran a Kickstarter that first year simply because our budget on that movie was like $200. I mean, we shot it with the cameras we had, and we really did not have any money. But we wanted to be able to put DVDs of the movie on, out. And so we actually ran a Kickstarter just to fund production of DVDs, and the Kickstarter we had asked for $500 and it made like $6,500. So that was actually the beginning of where we started turning to crowdfunding at the beginning of each year to fund the production of everything we put out throughout the course of the year. So this year our Kickstarter is going to fund On the Trail of Bigfoot. That'll be obviously funding the complete distribution and things like that, since the series is already done. But the other thing it'll be funding is Terror in the Skies, which is our Illinois winged cryptid documentary that'll be out in June, and it'll also fund Momo, the Missouri Monster. But yeah, the Kickstarters, we try to run Kickstarters the way that I would want to back one, because I actually back a few Kickstarters each year. Mostly, I'm a huge indie comic book fan, so I end up backing a ton of comic book Kickstarters, and occasionally movie ones as well. But we try to run them the same way we would, want to back them, and that is that we load them with a ton of really cool rewards, and so people are hopefully getting an equal or greater value than they would if they just bought stuff off our web store. And we also offer things you wouldn't, non-physical rewards, credits in the your name in the credits of the film, and stickers and digital copies of the movie and production diaries that you can't get unless you back the Kickstarter, and all kinds of stuff that hopefully makes it feel like people aren't just donating to us or taking part in a GoFundMe, but rather that they're getting something in return for what they're giving. And I think people at this point, for a lot of the STM supporters, the people that support STM each year, I think this is one of the biggest events that we put on during the year. For some people, it's as big as the actual release of the movie. I think people get excited to take part in the Kickstarter and to see how much we can actually manage to raise each year to throw back into the films. And anyone that's watching Small Town Monsters over the last 4 years, would probably back me up on this, but I think every year you can see that the production value goes up, just the Kickstarters tend to make more every year than they did the year before, and we turn around and put all of that into the productions we're making. So I think every year we try to get better at not just things like special effects and the bells and whistles, but also make sure that we're getting better at storytelling and telling stories better. And hopefully people that back are able to see their money actually show up in the films themselves.
Well, but not only that, but they get to feel like they're part of the process of this. They're part of telling these stories and keeping these legends alive. And like you said, you always find a way to give them kind of cool rewards, whether it be physical or non-physical things. But I'm sure everybody goes crazy for the great artwork that's associated with every one of these productions and having that hanging on their wall. And people really love just the tone, and they love the style that Small Town Monsters has brought to this, and I'm seeing it rub off on other filmmakers. When other filmmakers are coming back and saying, I really like what Seth Breedlove does with the Small Town Monsters, that's got to mean something to you to know that now you are influencing others.
Yeah, that's weird. It's really weird because like more than anything, that's probably the weirdest thing for me. But yeah, the art and stuff that goes into our films is extremely important. Like we actually are planning on next year as part of like next year's Kickstarter, the 2020 Kickstarter. That'll be the 5-year anniversary of Small Town Monsters, and I think the plan is to put together this like behind the scenes book, and a large portion of that will just be some of the undiscovered artwork and unreleased artwork and released artwork and production sketches and stuff like that, because that is such a huge piece of what we do. And you can't undersell the impact something like Sam Sheeran's posters has on our success. I think people see his posters and they automatically know it's a Small Town Monsters production. The two that he's done for our 2020 or 2019 projects are two of my favorite posters that he's put out. He did the Momo poster is kind of a classic Sam Sheeran monster poster, but his Terror in the Skies poster is amazing because it kind of crams everything onto one image that that movie's going to focus on. And I'm really excited, for people to get to own like an 11x17 print of those. People, that's one really cool thing we've noticed is like people will frame our posters and then they hang them, like in their basement or I know someone tagged me today who'd hung a bunch of our posters in their office. So that's super cool. And like we have, it doesn't just stop with like Sam Sheeran on the posters. My wife actually created the Bray Road Beast official one sheet, and she created the alternate poster for the Mothman of Point Pleasant. She's created alternate posters for a bunch of our titles, but her Bray Road Beasts poster is like one of my favorite movie posters. Period. She did the actual artwork, and then Zach Palmisano, who is director of photography on my movies, he did like the hand-drawn lettering and stuff. And we've actually been told by like people in Hollywood that our branding and the posters and all that kind of stuff are every bit as good as stuff that's going on at like major studios. And we're doing it, we're managing to do it on like half the, way under half the money that those huge studios have. So, but as far as like impact on other filmmakers, I mean, that's really important. I hope, my hope is like other filmmakers know to would understand that like the biggest thing, like our success isn't driven by any sort of it's not driven by a massive amount of time spent watching other paranormal content. Like I think our influences and stuff filmically are actually probably outside of that paranormal world, and the amount of work too that goes into it is massive. But to hear people say something like like they're influenced by our work will never fail to weird me out, just because it's just so surreal to hear that from anyone. Because I still think of us as like a group of buddies, doing something we all love to do, and that really is all it is. Like tonight we actually had our first pre-production meeting tonight for Momo, the Missouri Monster, and it is literally we're sitting in my kitchen, and it's myself and my wife and Adam and Zach and Jason, and Zach and Jason I grew up with, and we've been friends since we were kids, and Adam is a good friend, and and then there's my wife. So it's not like a boardroom is telling us what to do or anything like that. It's like it is as homegrown a crew as you can get when it comes to SDM, and there's tons of different facets to it and all these different people that are contributing. But I think at the end of the day, like we all just really want to tell great stories, and we work extremely hard to figure out how to do that, with all the constraints that we're under.
Well, you mentioned the poster for Momo, and I love the description that you have in the one sheet is posted up on the Facebook page, and of course smalltownmonsters.com is the main site to find everything. But you have a great line here where it says, "The documentary filmmaking of Small Town Monsters meets the drive-in horror stylings of 70s cinema." And that right there already has the goosebumps building up on my arms.
Oh, dude, like I said, we had our first pre-pro meeting tonight for it, and this is a story, and Adam can chime in here too because he's producing that one. But I've been wanting to tell the Momo story for years, like going all the way back to Minerva Monster. That particular story was one I wanted to retell. But we were aware that there were going to be some serious obstacles to telling it. Namely that there really aren't many original witnesses left. There aren't many people who want to talk about the story that live in the town, and actually approaching it like one of our typical movies was going to be extremely difficult. And we have to be really cautious about the way we talk about this too, just because like I don't want to give away stuff to as far as like how the approach is going to be. I think people are going to see trailers for this. We actually had this discussion tonight. I think when the trailers start hitting for Momo, people are probably going to be a little confused as to what the movie is, and then when they sit down to watch it, it's going to be a shock to the system, I think, in a lot of ways. But it is definitely every bit of the STM, typical honest to goodness documentary, but mashed up with a 1970s horror movie. It's our first time to really delve into like narrative filmmaking, and I don't know. I haven't been. Every movie, obviously, we have to be excited about to make, because otherwise you wouldn't do it, because it's so much work and you got to have a love for the subject you're covering. So don't take this as me degrading any of the other projects we've worked on, but this is honestly the most excited I've been about jumping into a story in quite a while. Like, I'm just very excited about having the opportunity to tell the story in the way that we're going to approach it. And Adam can probably hop in on there too.
No, I think that what's really interesting for me, I might have a bit of a unique perspective on this, just having been outside of STM for the first couple of years and then being able to come in here on this is, you've seen throughout the first STM films kind of the progression and the kind of the maturation of Seth as a filmmaker and as just the company as a whole. And then, like Seth said, Momo presents some unique challenges in that there are not a lot of people either still around or that are willing to talk about the events. And so in order to make this something, because the story is unbelievable, it's such a cool story, and to be able to take that and keep, what you might call like on brand with Small Town Monsters, and be able to still tell this story, but tell it in a really unique way that is going to be Small Town Monsters, but it's going to be uniquely Small Town Monsters in a way that, fans of STM haven't seen before. As someone who was a fan and is a fan, to see this happening, it's something that I would have been thrilled with, several years ago before becoming involved. And then, like Seth said, mentioning, just kind of touching on the excitement piece, it's really, it's a really cool thing to be sitting around the table with everyone and just seeing the genuine excitement that this kind of thing brings. There's a palpable kind of excitement there for what's to come, and really excited to hear what people think about this. Like I said, it's going to be Small Town Monsters. You know what that means. You know that it means good storytelling and a definite documentary side to things, but it's also going to be an evolution of what's been done before, partly by necessity, but partly because this is, I think, a natural step for STM to take. So it's going to be exciting for sure.
Well, Adam, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of the Momo story, because I don't want people, listening to the show to think you're talking about the picture of the lady with the weird eyes and the pointed nose. It's not the Momo challenge. This is something completely different. Why don't you give everybody kind of an overview of that story?
Yeah, just to give a super broad overview. I mean, Momo is the Missouri monster, so it took place back in the early 70s in a town called Louisiana, Missouri. And, there are pieces and parts of this story that are very traditional, what you would consider a Bigfoot story. Creature in the woods and sightings and some fairly terrifying moments here and there, and, large groups of people going searching for a monster in the woods and things like that. But like we mentioned earlier, there's also some high strangeness involved. There's some, more or less disembodied voices and things like that that are just going to be really interesting to see put on film and told in a unique way. But I mean, like I said, just a very high level overview. The traditional kind of Bigfoot story, but combined with just some things that maybe don't pop up as often. And the story is much bigger and deeper probably than what a lot of people realize, even if you think maybe you have an idea of what happened and kind of the scope of what happened. I think it's bigger than that, and I think we're going to be able to show that and give people kind of a really unique perspective on this story that I think is relatively well known within kind of the Bigfoot community, but probably not as known, or not as most people don't know everything that kind of took place back in the early to mid 70s with the story. So it's gonna be good for sure. So just think Bigfoot, but with a twist, I guess.
I love it. And I love the fact that, with the Small Town Monsters series, it's been all over the place. We're not dealing with just one corner of the world. We're not dealing just with, just your own neck of the woods. We're dealing with stories that come from everywhere. And this comes from a place with a great name.
Yeah,
You're right.
Louisiana, Missouri is super confusing though.
It really is.
I was wildly confused about the actual state that this story was set in for quite a while, until not that long ago. But yeah, but this is. I mean, I grew up in Ohio, so I'm in the Midwest. So we're in the middle of telling the Midwest trilogy with that started with the Bray Road Beast and then is moving into Terror in the Skies, and then we'll wrap up with Momo. But to get to actually play within the sandbox of the Midwest is kind of cool, because it's introduced me to places I was totally unaware of. So, I'd never been to Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and that was a very unique town. And then to move from Elkhorn into Alton, Illinois, and Lawndale, Illinois, and even Chicago, that was truly extremely eye-opening as far as how drastically different various parts of the state of Illinois are. And then to get to work on the Missouri Monster and Louisiana, Missouri is going to be really something, because I get the impression that it is sort of a deep South feeling, despite the fact that I think a lot of us consider Missouri, the Midwest.
Is there, so you're saying that this is going to be the one that comes out later, that Terror in the Skies will actually come out before the Momo movie?
Oh, yeah. Terror in the Skies is actually almost probably 40% of the way done as far as editing is concerned. We actually shot it all the way back in September. And I've been working on it on and off while I was editing On the Trail of Bigfoot. And now that On the Trail of Bigfoot is wrapped up, I'm full scale into working on Terror in the Skies. So Terror in the Skies will be out in very early June, like the first week of June, and Momo will be out sometime in the fall, probably the first week of October or the final week of September. But yeah, Terror in the Skies is actually the next STM production.
And can you give us a little bit of the background of that story?
Yeah, I actually love this story, and it's I think I actually said to Adam, it's probably the most Seth movie that that STM's made. It draws on a lot of my influences, like my film influences, especially like Steven Spielberg and Alfred Hitchcock and things like that. I would have a hard time. I think of our Bray Road Beast movie as being very, very much a horror film, and this is very much not a horror film. I think it's much more of like a mystery or an adventure, with some truly like gorgeous cinematography. You'll see, actually, the trailer for this drops on Tuesday, and it'll debut on Bloody Disgusting, and then it'll move over to all the other websites on Thursday, the same day as the Kickstarter launch. But the first trailer for this is unlike any trailer we've cut before, and I think people are going to get kind of a sense of what we're doing with the film, and it's going to be really cool because it's completely different from what we did with the Bray Road Beast, and it's going to be completely different from what we do with Momo, the Missouri Monster. So you're really going to get this very bizarre change in tone from throughout the course of the Monsters of the Midwest trilogy, where you get this sort of very modern feeling horror movie with Bray Road Beast, and then this sort of adventure mystery, almost romanticized view of the Midwest with Terror in the Skies, and then wrapping up with Momo, which is a throwback to 1970s drive-in horror movies. But yeah, Terror in the Skies is a sort of an in-depth look at the winged cryptid phenomenon, particularly like focused on the state of Illinois, beginning with the Pyasa bird legend in Alton, Illinois. The for the uninitiated, which I was actually one of the uninitiated until September. The Pyasa was this legend. Outside of Alton, Illinois, there used to be a painting on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi River of this large winged creature. And the legend went that the Native Americans in the area used to be sort of haunted by this giant monstrous bird. And to appease it, they would actually have to feed it, give it a sacrifice, basically like a human sacrifice every year. And finally, one of the chiefs was fed up with that tradition, and he went to find the bird and kill it. And to this day, the Pyasa still is a big deal in Alton, Illinois. They have there's a mural of it that is on the side of one of the bluffs. It is not the original mural. The original mural was actually destroyed, and then it was remade in like the 1930s, and then that version was also destroyed. And there's a whole new mural in Alton. But the story, Alton's sort of history of winged cryptids doesn't end with the Pyasa, because in the 1940s they had a sort of a what they call a flap, no pun intended, of giant thunderbird sightings that happened around Alton, Illinois during a 1 or 2 week period in April of 1948. And then the movie will actually move up to Lawndale and tell the story of the Lawndale attempted abduction story, wherein a large winged cryptid actually picked up a young boy and tried to fly off with him. We also have 2 witnesses, one of which was a really skilled outdoorsman who saw a giant bird with a 20-foot wingspan in a field. And another guy who saw something in his car, and then it moves on to Chicago, and you'll learn about the Chicago Mothman or Chicago Phantom, however you want to put that, sightings that have happened more recently. So it's really like an induction into the entire subject of giant birds and pterosaurs and the Mothman itself within the state of Illinois. It's the lineup of people we have that we interviewed for this one is really cool too. We had Lauren Coleman as our central character because he actually grew up in Illinois. So we flew Lauren out to Illinois, and he was with us for the filming. So our main characters are Lauren Coleman and Troy Taylor. Troy is known more as like a ghost hunter, but he also has a fascination with cryptids, and he had written a little bit about the Lawndale stuff. So we interviewed Troy. So Troy Taylor, Lauren Coleman, Chad Lewis, who did the Van Meter Visitor book, Kevin Nelson, who's been involved with a lot of Chad's research and is working on a Big Muddy Monster book, actually. They're both in the documentary. Allison Jornlin is in it, Tobias Wayland, some witnesses. Ken Gerhard is in there. It's a really cool lineup of investigators, and then obviously we have some great witnesses as well. But the story is really sprawling, and I'm really excited too about the introducing viewers, I guess, to the geography and the terrain of the state of Illinois, because it's super bizarre. Like, you almost have 3 states in one state. You've got Southern Illinois, which is a lot like the South. They actually call it Little Egypt, which I never knew. And then we move up to Central Illinois, which is kind of your classic Illinois. It's flat, boring pasture land where you can see endless cornfield off to the horizon. And then Northern Illinois is focused very heavily on the sort of industrial sprawl of Chicago and Lake Michigan. So it's unlike anything we've done thus far, but I sometimes feel like I could say that about every title we make. We're always trying to approach things from a different perspective and bring new storytelling techniques to the stories we're telling. And this one, like I said, I feel like this is the most me that one of our movies has been.
Well, and Adam, that must be exciting for you to hear, because, a lot of filmmakers could have the success that Seth has had with the early Small Town Monsters movies and just say, okay, I just got to keep cranking out the same format for all these different legends. But Adam, to hear Seth talk about wanting to always have different, just a different feel, a different approach, a different technique in each one, it must make you excited to work alongside with him.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And admittedly, I haven't been a huge part of terror, only because I've kind of been focused a bit more on the Momo side of things. But what is interesting is to see Seth kind of explore kind of his creativity a little bit, I think. And one thing specifically that, talking about the terror trailer that I've had the privilege of looking at a little early, is that I would almost, and Seth may have a different idea, but there's a certain almost whimsical nature to it a little bit. He's nodding his head, so that means I'm allowed to say that. But there's something different about it, and I've purposefully kind of stayed a bit away from knowing the story so much. Just because, again, going back to what I said earlier, I'm a fan of Small Town Monsters, and this is a really cool thing for me to kind of be working on a project alongside Seth while he's doing some other things, and be able to just see bits and pieces of these, and then as a fan of STM, just kind of get a sneak peek at these enough to make me excited about it. But back to your point, it is really cool to see Seth kind of take a different approach to these movies and look at things a bit differently. And then even, he's done some different things with Invasion and, Flatwoods and things like that. But I think even the whole idea of Thunderbirds is even another kind of arm off of this kind of cryptid world. A lot of times I make the mistake of really looking at Bigfoot and really looking at that and just the very small offshoots of that. But to see really branching out into kind of the Thunderbird realm and the that area, I think is really, really interesting. And my personal opinion anyway, and I tend to be more interested in the things that I think are potential are more likely. I think other than the idea of a giant North American ape, I think a giant bird is certainly I think that's well within the realm of possibility and reality, which makes it more exciting to me, because I think ultimately I'm still a little boy who just wants to believe that there are unknown things out there and monsters in the woods and in the sky and whatever else. And, there's that sense of adventure. And I think this movie in particular really conveys that, which I think is going to be really cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, just piggybacking off that real quick, like one of the reasons we do this, like rather than like we could have hit on like the format that the Moth made of Point Pleasant, because that's been our biggest success. We could have hit on that format where it was, very, very much like a ground level story that had probably more animation, or at least more extended animation than any movie we've made since, and it had very detailed, very extended recreations, and then we had the timeline and all these things. We could have really just sort of echoed that over and over again. But I think we would all get so bored. So, because we put out 2 movies a year, and so for our animators and for myself and for Brandon doing the music, like you just have to keep things constantly evolving and changing, so you don't, just feel like you're spinning your tires or something like that. And we do, the movies do follow a similar story structure. There's the opening is always introduction of the town, and the closing is how was the town impacted. But other than that, we always feel like we can pretty much change up everything else within those, the films that we're making.
Sure, because each legend is going to be its own character. It's going to have its own feel. It's going to have its own tone. So you need to be able to be malleable, to be able to make sure that the film is representing that as best that it can, instead of trying to take a legend and sandwich it into some sort of format that you've already gone into it, kind of already with the idea of having to shoehorn everything into that format.
Yeah, I mean, like the Flatwoods monster film is always the one I go back to with that, because like, we wanted that film to feel like an old late 1940s, early 1950s sci-fi movie, and that was because of the fact that case took place in 1952. It was clearly at a time when, America was very involved in the space race and all that kind of stuff, and we wanted it to echo the feel of the time and the pop culture of the time. And so every film has its own personality, just like every legend has its own personality.
And I do find it very interesting that when people are, hearing about some of these stories they're hearing for the first time by seeing your films, but they're able to immediately start placing them in kind of the grander narrative of all of this. And you don't really try to blow up the individual legends and make them fit a larger picture. You let people kind of put those pieces together on their own. But people are starting to do that. They're starting to say,
yeah, and actually, I mean, I totally think that opportunity is there for someone. I mean, preferably it's me, but like for there to be a larger narrative that these are all fitting within. I mean, that's actually we've been in pre-production, or not. I don't even think you can call it pre-production. We've been in the concept stages on a Small Town Monsters original series with the Hollywood production company for the last like 6 months now. And the entire push behind that was to try to figure out a way to tell these stories, but to fit them into a sort of larger narrative that would expand on a particular theory or concept within the paranormal realm, if that makes any sense. So, so you tell high strangeness stories, but each one sort of melds into the next and further unravels the different threads of that high strangeness, subject, but within the context, obviously, of like Small Town Monsters legends.
No, I love that. I love when we can start to put together the individual trees and see the larger forest. And I mean, I don't know if you've had a chance to catch Hellier yet, but they did a lot of that same idea of, just trying to see like what are the connections here between these different stories. And I think, oddly enough, as much as people have gone out and researched these stories and investigated these stories and tried to find as much of the actual factual information as they could about them, it takes somebody coming in with a documentarian eye to be able to come in and start putting all those pieces together, because sometimes people are so wrapped up in the individual legend that they can't really see how it ties into other legends.
Oh yeah, and I mean that can run the gamut of subjects within the the cryptid and paranormal and ufological worlds, and there are weird connecting points between all these subjects for sure. And that's one of the things I've always found so fascinating about places like Skinwalker Ranch or the Chestnut Ridge, where all of a sudden you've got a location a geographical location where all of a sudden all of those disparate threads are suddenly pulled together in one location where they seem to intermingle on a weird level. That's one of the strangest aspects of Skinwalker or Chestnut, but it's also what I really love about those stories so much.
Well, I think we've seen enough of the proof over the years that there is something to these stories. We've seen enough of I don't want to say the believable side of things, because I'd like to really be able to believe everybody, or at least take them at face value. But we've seen more and more of the stories that are just hard to dismiss pop up with a lot of these. And the more that we're seeing those, and the more that they're presented in long form format like you're doing, the easier it is for people to start accepting the possibilities. And it's not just about sending out, throngs of other now amateur monster hunters that are going to go out there and research these things and spend time out in the woods themselves. It's about getting the everyday person who sees one of these films and then comes back and says, well, I think I might have seen something like that. They're the ones that are really going to keep these legends going forward, more so, no offense, Adam, than researchers like us that are out there in the field doing work. But instead, it's the regular everyday people that are having the experiences and sharing them with other people.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a big part of the whole thing for me, is that I feel like people are so cynical and jaded about things, and there is this general sort of feeling, I think, amongst people that we've discovered everything. There's nothing left to discover here on Earth. We know everything, and hopefully, things like Small Town Monsters movies will open the eyes of people to, at least looking into these subjects. And even if it's not that, hopefully they'll just appreciate the stories for what they are. And hopefully that keeps them, alive to an extent, because a large part of what we do is capturing folklore or folktales, in a bottle, and hopefully future generations can enjoy the legend, as it's told by us. I mean, it's always been weird for me to talk about the documenting of history aspect of what we do, because it makes it sound so lofty, and I don't have that impression of what we're doing. But at the end of the day, I do feel like at least there is a small part of that documenting of history that we are definitely doing on some of these stories. I mean, in the case of the Flatwoods Monster, we got the final interview that Fred May will ever give. We got the only interview that Ed May will ever give, and that hopefully is a time capsule for people, that they can look back over the years and say, as that story continues, especially as that story continues to evolve into a legend, they can look back to what the actual witnesses said in our film, and have a little bit of an insight into how that legend was actually born. And maybe that is a weird thing about that movie too, is that movie is strangely meta. But yeah, there's a little bit of that time capsule element to what we're doing. Hopefully people understand that over time. I don't know that they will now, but hopefully over time, our movies will age well enough that people will revisit them and see them more as a time capsule than anything.
I think looking back to I became involved and developed a love for this stuff from my dad, and he passed on stories to me, and I'm sure that that's happened a million times over across the country, across the world. And I don't think you can undersell kind of the importance of what that part of Small Town Monsters is. It is preserving stories, because I mean, what a shame it would be to have all of this and to have all of these great stories, whether or not you take them as fact, whether or not you even entertain the idea that there's a possibility out there. It's adventure, and it's fun, and it keeps you thinking, and it's exciting. And for those to just die off, with the people who experience them, would be such a shame. And I think that it is a big part, and I think it's a very kind of I think it's an important part of what Small Town Monsters is doing, and what Seth has started, and what he's doing is preserving these stories so there can be generations after generations after generations to enjoy them, and to get the same joy I think that a lot of us have gotten out of them, growing up, and obviously still get out of them to this day.
We talk about filmmaking as an art, and as much as it is an art, it's also, now our modern day campfires that we're all sitting around and sharing stories. Instead of sitting around an actual fire, we're sitting around a 50-inch flat screen. So it's really it's the same idea. It's sharing these stories and legends and keeping them in the conversation.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because like Adam and I were talking, because Adam's a writer and works on his website and tells stories that way. And I was a writer, and I mean I guess I consider myself still a bit of a writer, even though I find it more frustrating these days than anything. But like Adam and I had this discussion yesterday at the office about the fact that, like, in a way, filmmaking is just another form of writing. I mean, it's visual. It's like visual writing. I mean, it's all storytelling, but it really is just figuring out the best possible way to tell a story that utilizes your particular talent. And I don't believe I have any great deal of talent. I've always said I believe I have some sort of weird, like, there's something wrong in my head that I'm too dumb to quit. So I'll just press forward on something despite the fact that I probably should have quit years ago. This is hopefully going to prove to be the reason I'm able to keep doing this is because I'm too dumb to quit, and over time I teach myself better ways of doing what I'm doing. But I mean, it's all storytelling, and I utilize a lot of the stuff that I learned while I was writing for newspapers. I utilize a lot of those storytelling techniques in filmmaking, and especially boiling a story down to its core elements. Like, that is something that I constantly have to turn to, is like, well, if I was writing for the newspaper, I had 400 to 600 words to tell a story. And, what is the best way to do that? What are the absolute key elements of that story that should go in there, to make sure that it's told to the best of my abilities. And that constantly comes up in our films, is like, how do I boil this down to the essentials?
Well, you might be humble about it, but I will say I knew from the Minerva Monster movie that we had somebody special here. And so thank you for, fighting through those feelings of doubt and keep going, because you've been turning out some great quality stuff, which everybody in the chat room has been saying they're all going to go check out as soon as this episode is over, which will just be in a few minutes. But before we go, we want to let everybody know when the Kickstarter is starting, because it's actually kicking off this week.
Yeah, it kicks off on Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll hit the launch button. And then we do like a Facebook Live Kickstarter launch party. So if you're a backer, or even if you're not, and you just want to talk to us live, we'll pretty much the whole crew comes over, and we sit down in front of the computer, and we do this 2 or 3 hour long Facebook Live Q&A. The Kickstarter itself launches at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday the 7th, and then it runs through March 9th. So, and like I said, we have tons of cool stuff that's in this year's Kickstarter. There's posters and DVDs. There's one of my favorite things is a retro lobby card set. So it's it's like an old 1970s film lobby card, like you would find in an actual movie theater in the 70s. We're doing a Momo lobby card set, so it'll be like a still frame from the movie and a really cool like border around it. And we're going to do a whole set of those as one of the rewards. There's a Momo T-shirt. There's a Small Town Monsters hat. There's a statue of Momo designed by Gene St. Jean. There's a Mothman sticker. There's all kinds of stuff. I think that it's by far my favorite Kickstarter we've put together.
And so that'll be on Thursday at 7 o'clock, and people can check that out by going to smalltownmonsters.com.
Yeah, I mean, the best place to see the link as soon as it goes live is just going to be through our social media. But my wife will pop it up on the website too as soon as it goes live. So yeah, pretty much anywhere that we are on the web, you'll probably see us posting links as soon as it goes live.
And why don't we, in the final few moments that we have, let everybody know all the places where they can find each one of you.
Yeah, so I am mainly on Instagram as far as Small Town Monsters presence goes, and that's Adam _small_town_monsters, just because I wanted to make that as complicated as possible. And then I do all of my writing on my site called searchthewoods.com, and that's just going to be general thoughts on the whole idea of Bigfoot, and I try to take a common sense approach to it, and I love to have discussions there as well, so people can check that out. So Instagram and searchthewoods.com would be where you can find me.
Our movies and stuff are available on most streaming platforms other than like Netflix and Hulu, so you can find them on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, Vimeo on Demand, VidiSpace, PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, all that kind of stuff. And then DVDs are available through shop.smalltownmonsters.com. And you can read and learn more about us on smalltownmonsters.com or find and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we actually do a Small Town Monsters podcast that is called Monsteropolis. And that's out there somewhere. That's floating in the ether somewhere.
Well, great stuff, guys. Thank you so much for joining us and for keeping us up to date with everything going on in Small Town Monsters. And maybe we'll revisit everything, too, when the release dates get closer. It's been a while since we've had Lauren Coleman on, so maybe it's time we get him come back on. And it sounds like it'll be right in the mix of Red Sox season when the film drops. So, I'm sure he'd love to come on and talk some baseball, too. Yeah,
man. Hey, get feeling better.
Oh, I feel great. Trust me, I sound way better than I actually feel. Thanks, guys, for putting up with my voice all night.
Thanks for talking to us, man.
All right, take care. Have a great night. That is Seth Breedlove and Adam Duggan from Small Town Monsters. And again, Thursday night, 7 o'clock, get involved with the Kickstarter. Really, I've been looking at some of the stuff that they have listed on the Facebook page for the Kickstarter, and those lobby cards look amazing. Anybody that's a fan of the Small Town Monsters brand, that their logo is really cool. So if you can get a hat with that on it, it's definitely worth the investment into the Kickstarter. And really, you want to be a part of this because you want to keep these stories out there. You want to keep them being told. And that's what we do here. We try to keep these stories, keep these subjects in the limelight, try to keep them in the conversation. When people are talking about paranormal topics, we want to make sure that we keep stories just as much from a historical value as we do some of the new reports that are out there as well. Next week, we're going to talk about some of those with UFO sightings. We'll talk about some older sightings. We'll talk about some newer things and what it all means with Dr. Irina Scott. We'll also be joined briefly next week by Jamie and Val from the X-Filers Unite Conference. We'll find out more about that. Then coming up later on in the month, we'll be talking Hawaiian legends and lore, some of the mysterious stories from the islands of Hawaii. And then we'll be talking with Kimberly Dawn later on in the month about her work, not only as a medium, but also how she tries to help spirits move on and how she can come and help remove spirits from your home. And those of you who listen to the show know I have some thoughts on that. So I'm sure looking into some of that as well, coming up with her. And then just later on in the spring, we've got so many great shows coming up. We're going to be talking about the Pascagoula UFO abduction. We're going to be talking about the Anunnaki. we're going to be talking about some real-life demonic cases. So we're trying to keep things as weird as we can here in the 13th year of Spooky South Coast. We don't rest on our laurels, just like Seth Breedlove doesn't. We always try to find a way to kind of reinvent things. We're going to keep doing that throughout the course of 2019. Hopefully you'll come along with us each week for the ride. Spooky Crew at SpookySouthCoast.com is the way to find us. Until next week, for Matt, for Stephanie, I'm Tim. Stay spooked.